A former US president and the Hamas political leader meet in Damascus. Jimmy Carter fends off criticism, insisting Hamas should be brought into the political fold. But without a mandate, can he make a breakthrough? This is Inside Story. Hello, I'm Imran Garda. The current US administration labels Hamas a terrorist organization, but that's not stopping one former president from talking to them. Jimmy Carter met with Hamas officials in Egypt on Thursday, and on Friday he'll be in Damascus, where he's scheduled to meet Hamas's top leader Carter-Meshaal. The visit comes as 20 people were killed by an Israeli attack in the Gaza Strip on Wednesday. Among the dead, several children and a Reuters journalist who was covering the conflict. Well, the Israeli government was very critical of Carter's move. During his recent visit to Israel, the former US president was shunned by its political leadership. For its part, the US administration said the Carter-Meshaal meeting wouldn't serve any purpose.
Let's point the finger exactly where it belongs. It belongs on Hamas for having caused that coup against the Palestinian Authority, and it belongs on Hamas, the blame does, for continuing rocket fire against innocent Israeli civilians. So I find it hard to understand what is going to be gained by having discussions with Hamas about peace when Hamas is in fact the impediment to peace.
But Jimmy Carter defended his plans to meet Meshaal, saying he's not a negotiator.
I'm going to try everything I can to get him to agree to peaceful resolution of differences, both with the Israelis through Gaza and also with the Fatah. But I'm not a negotiator. I'm just trying to understand different opinions and provide communications between people that won't communicate with each other. So I think that if he does have anything constructive to say, he or the president of Syria, Assad, then I would bring that to other people.
Before Carter's presidency ended in 1981, he had a reputation as a peacemaker with a special interest in the Middle East. In 1979, he brokered discussions at Camp David between Egypt and Israel. That culminated in a historic peace deal between two of the region's bitterest enemies. Even after he left office, he continued to push for peace and development in the Middle East. In 1996, Carter monitored Palestinian elections. He went back again for the elections in 2006 when Hamas was voted into power. But he's caused alarm at home by taking a very different stance from official policy. When he published Palestine, Peace, Not Apartheid in 2006, he came under fire for what his critics called lies, distortions, and a strong anti-Israeli bias. Then, Carter's open criticism of the Iraq War and his meetings with anti-US figures such as Fidel Castro have left the White House red-faced. Well, joining our discussion today are our guests in Ramallah, Mustafa Barghouti, an independent Palestinian politician and former Minister of Information. In Tel Aviv, Yuri Avneri, former Knesset member and founder of Gush Shalom. And in Washington, D.C., Clifford May, the president of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Welcome, gentlemen. Mr. May, if I could start off with you. If Jimmy Carter is not there as a mediator or a negotiator, what's his role going to be? What's he there for?
Let's give him the benefit of the doubt, and let's assume that he believes he is there sincerely to look for the elusive path to Middle Eastern peace. Nonetheless, I don't see how his visit makes any constructive contribution. I think it can actually do damage. What Jimmy Carter should be doing before he meets with somebody like Carter-Meshaal is reading the Hamas charter, which is very clear. There can be no recognition of Israel, not on any territory whatsoever. And that's not just a negotiating position. It is, with all due respect, a religious conviction. I think listeners to this show probably understand better than, for example, most Americans do, that Hamas's interpretation of Islamic doctrine is that any territory that has ever been ruled by Muslims cannot be ruled in the future or in present by infidels, by Jews or Christians. And with that in mind, there is just no way that Carter is going to change Meshaal's mind or open his heart or get him to do what would be necessary to relieve the conflict and the suffering of Palestinians and Israelis that has been going on for so long.
But Mr. May, are the Americans and Israelis just going to wish away Hamas? They're there. Do you never talk to them?
Well, I think you talk to them at the point when if it ever comes, and I'm not optimistic, that they say, okay, we have something to talk about. We would like to settle this conflict rather than destroy you, rather than annihilate your nation. If somebody wants to destroy you and you don't want to be destroyed, there's not a lot of room for compromise unless you want to say, okay, let's go halfway. You can half destroy us. There needs to be, from both sides, at the beginning of any discussion, the agreement that you get to live and we get to live, that you're not going to have everything you want, we're not going to have everything we want, and that we can therefore compromise. I think we have seen no sign whatsoever that Hamas is at that place yet. I am pessimistic that it ever will be, but we should be hopeful that perhaps there is some way in which it can change. Carter-Meshaal is not the one who is likely to make that change. He has been a hardliner forever, more so than those who actually live in Gaza, I would say. And I think the idea that Jimmy Carter is going to learn something from him useful or change his mind or bring him around to a more peaceful negotiating posture is really pretty fanciful.
Yuri Avneri, I would guess that you would look at this a little bit differently from Clifford May.
I would say exactly the opposite. I think there can be no peace without Hamas. We must talk with Hamas. We can talk with Hamas. I did talk with Hamas leaders before they were arrested. And I think President Carter is a person who clearly sees the facts as they are, beyond the usual propaganda such as which we heard just now. I think President Carter was the last American president who did anything for Israel instead of flattering us and pushing us further in the wrong direction. Carter made the peace with Egypt, which is the most important thing done for Israel in the last decades.
Mr. Avneri, you wrote an open letter to Jimmy Carter commending his move to speaking to Hamas. I wonder, how much clout does he actually have, though, given the fact that he doesn't really have a mandate?
It's not a question of having a mandate and having clout. The question is that he's opening a way. He's doing something which for many people was unthinkable and now becomes thinkable. After meeting the Hamas people, a clear-sighted person like Carter, meeting with Hamas people, people in Israel and everywhere, I hope, are starting to ask themselves, as many Israelis are already doing, why aren't we talking with Hamas? Hamas is at least half the Palestinian people. Can we make peace with half the Palestinian people and continue war with the other half? It makes no sense at all. You engage your enemy in talk. That's the whole idea of diplomacy. You talk with your enemy in order to put an end to the war. It is stupid to say, because I have a war, I will not talk with my enemy.
Mustafa Barghouti, sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Avneri. Let's bring in Mustafa Barghouti in Ramallah and look at the Palestinian opinion. Mr. Barghouti, are you personally and the Palestinian people as a whole open to Jimmy Carter meeting Carter-Meshaal?
Absolutely, and we support that. I met with President Carter in his last visit, and I understood from him that his efforts are directed clearly at relieving some of the problems here. He's calling for complete, comprehensive ceasefire. I don't know why anybody would be against that. He's calling also for the possibility of exchange of prisoners, releasing Shalit, the Israeli soldier, in exchange with Palestinian prisoners. He's calling also for a comprehensive view where everybody would accept a two-states option. So I don't think why Mr. May is so upset at that. I would like to respond to what he said. I mean, Mr. May maybe can enjoy the fact that his children are not at risk. He doesn't live here. He doesn't see people killed every day. And he can take extreme positions. But everything he said we could say about Israel. Israel is practicing apartheid in the occupied territories. It has created the worst type of apartheid, worse than what prevailed in South Africa at one point of time. Israel has been occupying us for 41 years, the longest occupation in modern history. Israel has dispossessed half of the Palestinian people, no less than 5 million people at the time now. 60 years ago and nothing has been done to relieve their pains. We could also say we don't want to talk to Israel, but we're saying we want to talk to Israel. We want to find a solution out of this mess. And Hamas has changed its positions. Hamas is practically accepting a two-state solution in accordance to 67 borders. Who is refusing that solution today? Israel. Who is objecting to negotiating to reach that solution today? Israel. Who is objecting to application of United Nations resolutions? Israel. Who is objecting to the application of international law and international humanitarian law? Israel. Who killed 388 Palestinians since Annapolis process started? Israel. I think we can sit down and blame Israel for all of this and say we don't want to talk. I don't understand why somebody is against, first of all, the right of Palestinians to be a democracy and practice democratic rights like Israelis do, and why shouldn't they be there negotiations between all the spectrum, all the political spectrum. We're not saying we don't like Lieberman, so he should be excluded from the Israeli government. We say if an Israeli government is elected by its own people, we should talk to it. The fact that Israel continues to arrest 1/3 of the elected members of the Palestinian parliament is by itself an indication of how much it has animosity against democracy and against the rights of the Palestinian people to have a similar equal status in future negotiations.
Now, we asked some Gazans what they think about Carter's meeting with Hamas leaders and if it will change anything. Here's what they had to say.
With regard to the meeting between Carter and Mr. Meshaal, we hope that this will be the beginning of a certain series of steps that will lead to removing the closure on Gaza. And second of all and most importantly is starting the dialogue between the Palestinian factions, because this is the real benefit that Palestinians will gain.
It is not a question of hope, but our expectation here as citizens in Gaza is very low. First of all, Mr. Carter is just a visitor in Damascus. He's searching something. We don't know what he's searching exactly. And he's leading the discussion or trying to lead the discussion with Mr. Carter-Meshaal. I think the correct way is to discuss the people on land here, on the ground, and I hope that Mr. Carter to do it again, maybe by the Egyptians, because they are more involved in this issue.
As a Palestinian citizen, I think this is a correct step. It would break the ice between America, the Western world, the international community and Hamas.
Right, it's time for a short break. When we come back, we'll ask, will the Carter-Meshaal meeting lead to international recognition or more isolation of Hamas? Stay with us.